Now, later I'll be speaking to Scott Hargraves, the new executive director of the brilliant think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs, about ESG, the acronym for Environment, Social and Governance, which is the moral guidebook for so-called corporate values these days. But first, Canadian psychiatrist and author Jordan Peterson published a piece in the Telegraph of London today exposing the, quote, totalitarian colours of one of the world's leading professional service networks, Deloitte. Deloitte is the third largest privately owned company in the United States, and its tentacles are everywhere. So we really should know what companies like this are up to. They are as active in the globalist movement as the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and various other unelected self-appointed moral guardians of ethical business practice. The Australian branch boasts that last financial year it contributed to policy, debate and outcomes on, among other things, climate and energy transition, gender equity and Indigenous reconciliation. A report by Deloitte found that recent extreme weather events were unprecedented, which is a dubious claim, and that climate change, if allowed to continue, will cost the global economy $178 trillion over the next 50 years. That figure's meant to frighten you, in case you were wondering. This is all based on modelling which half a century of bogus climate predictions have proved, to put it politely, not to be very reliable. Like all globalists, Deloitte recommends a worldwide reduction to net zero emissions by 2050. Initially, this will, quote, temporarily lower economic activity, which is another way of saying some people will lose their jobs. I'm guessing none of them will work at Deloitte. But eventually, quote, those most exposed to the economic damages of unchecked climate change would also have the most to gain from embracing a low emissions future, unquote. This sounds like Santa Claus promising kids a present if they behave all year. Peterson rightly questions how long this initial pain will go on. It could be for generations, he says. Then, quote, this is Peterson talking, all this painful privation is not only going to save the planet, it's going to make it far worse, unquote. Peterson singles out Australia, by the way, for committing to 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, a decision he describes as, quote, delusional for a country that depends on the use and production of resources. He lists the countries where ordinary people are rising up against this new globalist agenda, but sadly Australia isn't among them. There is political resistance in the United States though. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced legislation last month that would force retirement funds to stick strictly to their fiduciary duties and not discriminate against companies that failed to meet arbitrary ESG standards.